To its ancient founders, Stoicism was a system of rigorous engineering designed to restructure the human mind from its first principles. To build a functioning Stoic, one had to master three interlocking disciplines: ethics, physics, and logic. This marble bust depicts Zeno of Citium. Arriving in Athens in the late 4th century, he laid down the core axioms of the Stoic system. He taught in the competitive intellectual ecosystem of the Stoa Poikile, or the Painted Porch, a public Athenian colonnade that gave the movement its name. His successor, Chrysippus of Soli, appears here with the heavily furrowed brow of a system builder. He authored over 700 volumes to defend Zeno's framework. While Zeno drafted the ethical blueprints, Chrysippus engineered the formal logic and unified psychology necessary for the system to survive. Stoicism dominated antiquity because Zeno and Chrysippus fortified its logic to withstand the most relentless academic attacks of the Hellenistic age.
Zeno faced a plenary hurdle. He needed to maintain the strict virtue of Socrates while creating a philosophy that remained practical for citizens living in the material world. He analyzed the extreme positions of his era, such as the doctrine of Stilpo, who argued that external circumstances, such as extreme poverty or sudden illness, were completely irrelevant to a person's ultimate moral standing. On the opposing side, the Platonic Academy under Polemo taught that bodily and external advantages actually contribute to the good. In Hellenistic Athens, these positions were viewed as mutually exclusive. You either rejected the physical world to remain virtuous, or you admitted that virtue alone wasn't enough. Zeno resolved this conflict through a new ontological category that separated moral character from worldly circumstances. He defined this category as adiaphora, or indifference, things that do not in themselves make a person morally good or bad. However, because humans are naturally inclined to seek survival, Zeno subdivided these into preferred and dispreferred, based on their alignment with human nature. This bronze caduceus, a symbol of health, represents what Zeno classified as a preferred indifferent. While health is a natural object of pursuit, its possession does not make one's life morally better. We pursue these preferred indifferents because the discipline required to pursue them correctly is the very thing that develops our rationality. Worldly success is secondary. True virtue is found exclusively in the skill of living in agreement with nature while navigating the game of life. If virtue depends on living in agreement with nature, humans require a reliable method for perceiving what nature actually is. This requires a shift from ethics into physics. Zeno broke from Platonic metaphysics by completely rejecting the idea of innate, pre-existing knowledge or immaterial forms. He proposed an empiricist model, where the human mind begins as a tabula rasa, a blank piece of paper. All knowledge must be acquired externally, with sensory data transmitting physical imprints to the soul. Zeno defined the mechanism of this transfer as the phantasia cataleptike, or the cognitive impression. This type of impression is defined by its absolute clarity, guaranteeing an accurate one-to-one representation of the external object. The accumulation of these impressions creates concepts, which then form the building blocks of rational thought. Without this anchor in objective physical reality, the entire Stoic framework for navigating the world would dissolve into subjective opinion. While Zeno's model was revolutionary, early Stoics struggled to explain its physical mechanics without creating logical paradoxes. Cleanthes, for instance, argued that the soul was like a literal block of wax being physically depressed by signet rings. Chrysippus tested this wax block analogy against the complexity of real-world cognition. He argued that if the mind perceives a triangle and a square simultaneously, a literal wax soul would have to hold both shapes in the same space at once. Holding multiple simultaneous inputs would destroy the soul's configurations. The wax model was mathematically impossible. Chrysippus upgraded the concept, redefining the impression not as a physical stamp, but as a state of heterosis or alteration. He proposed that the mind acts like a volume of air, which can carry an indefinite number of different sound waves simultaneously without them merging or collapsing. This alteration model allowed the soul to process vast amounts of varied, simultaneous data without losing the fidelity of the individual impressions. By redefining the physics of thought, Chrysippus secured the machine against skepticism and establish the movement's intellectual dominance. The next challenge was explaining how the mind processes that data to generate human action. To do this, Chrysippus had to dismantle the psychological model popularized by Plato, the tripartite soul. This black figure vase illustrates the Platonic metaphor, a rational charioteer struggling to control a team of irrational horses representing appetite and ambition. Chrysippus utterly rejected this division. He powerfully argued that the human mind does not contain separate, competing, animalistic parts. He replaced the chariot with the hegemonicon, the unified, ruling faculty of the soul. The hegemonicon is rational through and through. Because it is a single, unified processor, it cannot be overpowered by lower biological urges. If the soul is entirely rational, how do Stoics explain irrational behaviors like blinding rage or overwhelming grief? Chrysippus reframed the nature of emotion. A passion is not an irrational beast that overrides the intellect. Every human action requires the assent of the hegemonicon. Therefore, a passion is actually the rational mind making a voluntary choice. When we act irrationally, it is because our unified mind has made a cognitive error, a false value judgment about what is truly good or bad. By unifying the soul, Chrysippus removed the excuse of biological impulses and placed the ultimate burden of moral responsibility on our own cognitive processing. When fully assembled, the system integrates Zeno's ethical axioms with the cognitive mechanics engineered by Chrysippus. Zeno's objective was the homo leguminos, a perfectly consistent current of life in harmony with nature.
Chrysippus's engine makes this goal possible by identifying the exact boundary where human control begins. We cannot control the external indifferents that strike us, but because our hegemonicon is a unified processor, we have absolute veto power over our assent. True tranquility is not achieved by altering the outside world, but by perfecting the internal processing of the soul. The painted porch functioned as a laboratory for cognitive engineering, providing a systematic method for aligning the human mind with the physical universe. Stoicism conquered the Hellenistic world because Zeno and Chrysippus transformed philosophy from a theoretical debate into a comprehensive, repeatable method for human resilience.